guys, and welcome back. Today I wanted to take a look at the 2025 free agency crop, which looks to be extremely interesting. Now, there's been a couple players like Mikko Rantanen that have ended up re-signing, but still, there's a lot of top-end players, especially on the forward group, that I think a lot of teams are going to be going after. So today I want to go through my top 25 free agents in this class, from forwards, defensemen, goaltending, and seeing who I think is the best and who I think could get paid the most. So make sure you watch till the end to find out the best free agents in this year's class and to see which players your team might end up signing, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year. Now, for me personally, I would categorize this free agent class as good. It's nothing spectacular, but there's a few players who could be at the top of your lineup, but a lot of players who I think will middle out on rosters. If you're looking for a middle six wing, I have good news for you. But even though this class is, I think, very forward heavy, there's quite a few interesting defensemen as well. Let's start out here at number 25 and my 25th best UFA in this class, in Dante Fabbro, who is somebody for Columbus, wouldn't have been in this position a year ago, but has really made a name for himself. As a former 17th overall pick, he's right in the prime of his career at 26 years old. Has really been finding himself in Columbus, especially this year. After being a waiver claim, starting with Nashville and ending with the Blue Jackets this season, you can see in 45 games, he's 5 goals, 11 assists, 16 points, has been pretty strong in all 3 zones, not really making too many mistakes, and in Fabbro's case, I think being the most confident he's ever been. Cap wages currently has him on a projected deal of 3 years at $3.7 million, but with how solid he's been for that Columbus team, I think he could easily get $4 million if he were to hit the open market, especially with his age there too. There's not really that much risk either. Now, at number 24, let's go on to a player that you might even remember is a free agent this year, and that is Anthony Mantha, who signed a 1-year prove-it deal with the Calgary Flames at $3.5 million, and it was going really well to start things out. With Calgary at the start of the year, he in 13 games had 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points, looked to be a major part of that Flames team that had been coming up in a major way, but of course got an injury and hasn't played since, which has been pretty brutal for him. But I think the body of work still shows Mantha as a premier scorer, somebody that in good goal scoring positions is able to produce for you. I think because of the injury, he was probably going to get a lot less than he otherwise would, but when he is healthy, he's proven to be a solid middle six forward and somebody that I think could really be an underrated addition for how cheap he might become. If there are teams out there worried about the injury history, I can understand why. Over the last 6 seasons, he's only played over 60 games twice, so I understand it, but I think if he is healthy, he could be somebody that people kind of forget as a free agent and get swooped up somehow for like $2 million. Now on to number 23, we go on to the LA Kings, and somebody that has been rumored to be re-signing with them but hasn't gotten a contract done yet. That is Vladislav Gavrikov, who is somebody that's been a pretty big core of that Kings team ever since we saw him dealt from Columbus to LA. He's always been a pretty consistent mobile D-man, nothing all that special, but has always played a pretty pivotal role. Somebody that will be a solid not bottom pair, but middle pair defenseman for you, and he's been that for both LA and Columbus for a while. This is another one like Fabbro, where I think for Gavrikov, he staying in LA, I think would be best for him personally, but the Kings are always up against the cap with how much that team has been up and down over the years, so we'll see how they're able to connect here, but I think most likely he'll end up re-signing, though it's more of an 85% chance. We'll just have to wait and see. Now we move on to number 22 and another Russian D here. Let's move on to Dmitry Orlov, who is somebody that's in a unique position here as a Carolina Hurricane, somebody that signed a relatively short-term deal with Carolina, a 2-year deal that's coming up after this season, and he's been pretty consistent in that regard for the Canes, decent puck mover, and he's been somebody that has had his good moments. But I think in Orlov's case, he's always somebody that you want a little bit more production from, at least the way he's more offensively oriented. But I think it will be interesting to see this next contract for him, because he's going to be 34 this July. He's somebody that has proven to have a pretty consistent track record, but I wonder how much term he's going to get, because I think that can make or break whether the Canes end up keeping him or not. Cap wages has him at just under $5 million for a 3-year term, which I think is pretty reasonable, but of course Carolina is always in a position to retool that defense. It was a reason why Orlov was brought in the first place, so we'll see what they do with him, and especially Brent Burns, who, spoiler alert, not on this list. Sorry, Unk. Now, we talked about his defensive teammate in Dante Fabbro. Now let's go on to Ivan Provorov, and I don't think there's a massive difference between the two. I think Provorov, though, is going to get a little bit more money than some people expect in this free agency. He was somebody that was making $6.75 million on this last contract, and is somebody that I think would probably come around that range still today, though maybe a little bit less considering his just kind of average track record. For me personally, I've never been the biggest Ivan Provorov guy. Whenever I watch him, I don't think there's anything that's truly special about his game, and that was something that we saw kind of being debated in Philly when he was playing top pair minutes there. Now I think he's kind of settled into, oh yeah, he's just a solid middle pair defenseman. Nothing that's overwhelmingly good for that position, but just decent in that role. And for Columbus, I think he's been that. He's had his real ups and downs this season. I think especially to start things out, it was looking really rough. He has recovered a little bit, but I think he's the type of player that just kind of gets overrated because of his position, for how many minutes he plays, but still a solid D-man who's likely going to command quite a bit. Now we get into the top 20 here and on to yet another defenseman. Trust me, as we go through, we'll get some more forwards in here. But at number 20, I have Neil Pionk of the Winnipeg Jets, who at 29 years old is going to be interesting here because he's been really consistent in his offensive production for Winnipeg, which is kind of just okay. In his first season, he got 45 points there in 71 games. Since then, he's filled more of a 30-35 point role, which is fine. But I think in his case, with the weapons he's had around him, I think he's just a little bit overrated, especially because of the emergence of Josh Morrissey as well. His position as that power play quarterback has kind of gotten a little bit sidelined. And I think Pionk is still a solid defenseman as a middle pair power play type of quarterback. I think he has some potential there, but I don't think he's going to get a ton of money in free agency, and that might lead a team like Winnipeg to be able to re-sign him eventually. Now, I might be wrong on that. Cap wages has him getting a pretty decent raise, going to $6.9 million on a 6-year deal. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. Considering this market as well, and not a ton of top-end offensive D, I could see a player like Pionk getting a little bit more value out there, but personally, more than 6.5 would be a mistake, even with the cap coming up. He's a solid player, but again, like some of the defense we talked about, nothing absolutely amazing. As a middle pair guy, though, I think could be useful for a lot of teams out there. Now, we're going to go into a player similar to Anthony Mantha that when they are playing, they're pretty fantastic offensively. And let's go on to number 19 in Jonathan Drouin, who I think is another situation that we might see where it just fits for both sides involved to stay. In Drouin's case, he's been really great with Colorado when he has played. But again, the injury issues always seem to come up. After having a really healthy season last year, playing 79 games, getting 56 points, really looking like he was starting to turn that page. This year, he's only played 33 games, but in those games, got 19 assists, 28 points, offensively was right back up there. It's just disappointing. It's frustrating to see the lack of consistency there. I guess it maybe is consistent with how injured he has been. When he is on the top of his game, he can be a pretty special player when it comes to feeding the pucks, the vision he's able to have there. But I think, in all honesty, he should still stay in Colorado, try to make that situation work, because his fit with McKinnon when they are going together is pretty awesome to watch. Now, at number 18, we're going to go on to a player that I'm not really sure what to think about heading after this season, and that is Patrick Kane of the Detroit Red Wings. Now, at 36 years old, I don't think he's going to be retiring anytime soon, but I don't think he's in a position where he's going to necessarily command a lot of money, and that was why he kind of took a little bit of a pay cut going to the Detroit Red Wings to try and rejuvenate that team, go to a team that could really give him the opportunity that they have given him, and especially since McCullough was hired, Kane's gone a lot better in the production standpoint, up to 40 points, 54 games, in a limited role, sheltered role, power play option. He can be solid. We know the offensive game that he's able to provide, even though I think there's still a lot of holes in his game. What he is what he is, and he's still going to get paid if he wants to be. It will be interesting, though, to see if Detroit misses the playoffs again this year, what happens with Kane, because even though it's been a pretty great fit for him offensively, I think he wants to make the playoffs at this stage in his career, and if Detroit's not making it happen for him, I could see him going in a different direction. Now we move on to number 17 and on to the first goaltender of this list. I wanted to give a special shout out here to Jake Allen, who I think is one of the best backups in the league today, and is somebody that I think could still be a fringe starter if he really was put in that position, even though he's 34 years old, and I don't think he's gonna get paid all that much this year, likely still around the 3-point he's making this season. He's somebody that I think has continually proved himself in limited roles. This year with New Jersey in 24 games, a .262 goals against average, a .910 save percentage. He's 13th in the entire league in goals saved above expected, up in a great tier of goaltending this season. So I think in Allen's case, even though he's not going to get paid likely as a top 20 player in this class, I think he deserves to be here just on merit alone. He's somebody that is just been such a consistent player year after year, and I think deserves, quite frankly, a pretty big payday. Now at number 16, we go into a player that some people might not have as high, but I think considering his consistency over the past couple years, he deserves to be up at this point, and that is Kyle Palmieri secondary of the New York Islanders. Now, personally, I would have traded him, but it seems like for the Islanders keeping him at the deadline, they're going to want to try to re-sign him. We'll see if that ends up happening. But at 34 years old, he's proved himself quite well. He's on pace for 53 points this year after 54 points last season. A really consistent player there offensively. He's been great on the power play as well. I don't think he's going to get paid all that much, at least in terms of the term there. But as a player right now, he's really proved himself still as a top 6 forward. And I think will likely get paid as a decent second liner, which he is. Now, at number 15, we go on to the second and final goaltender of this list. Really not a great goaltending crop. And then really the only one that I think will be a definitive starter for the team he signs with is Adin Hill. Now, whether he'll actually be a great one is kind of a different story. We'll see if he's actually able to live up to those standards. You can see with Vegas, he's been all up and down. Since he did win the Stanley Cup last year, it's been worse and worse every single season. He has a .904 save percentage this year, but he's still been solid, about a 10 goal save of expected, so not too bad there whatsoever. Just a decent goalie all around, and of course, that Stanley Cup win could get him a lot more dough than he otherwise would have got. Now, at number 14, we go on to a big-time forward on my favorite team, and one that I do see ending up re-signing, and that is Jamie Benn of the Dallas Stars, and somebody that you would also be a little bit surprised to see this high. But in terms of the offensive output, I mean, he deserves to be here. 60 points last season, and on pace for 52 points this year. Sure, he's had a little bit of a decline every single season since 2023, but he's still a solid power forward and somebody that can play up and down the lineup. Mostly playing on the third line this year, though, no fault of his own. The left wing depth there is just insane. The wing depth on the Stars in general is insane. But Ben, what he's been able to do with the leadership he's provided, and also just becoming more of an adaptable player as his skating has gotten worse and worse throughout his career, he's just been able to put himself in the best position to succeed and really gets the most as well out of the younger players he plays with. Him and Johnson are just such a great duo automatically, and that's largely because of just how good of an influence Ben is as well to the game. I see him re-signing, though, and not being on the open market, but in terms of free agents, still has to get mentioned. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Ben is not going to get $9.5 million on his next contract like he did the last. Otherwise, I think there would be some money laundering going on. Continuing on to number 13, and a player that has really established himself this year in a major way, let's go into Ryan Donato, who I thought was really working hard to get shipped away from Chicago, trying to be a trade deadline acquisition, but the Blackhawks didn't end up trading him and couldn't end up re-signing him in the end, but he's having a great season. On pace for 61 points, 29 goals, right places at the right times, but it's just been doing every single thing right for Chicago this year, and has been an excellent complimentary player there. We'll see how much he's able to stick, and it seems like for Chicago, he's gotten a pretty great fit there, so we'll see what happens, but he's somebody I think could also get underrated money if he were to go to the open market and would get a hefty raise over the $2 million he was making before. Now at number 12, we're going to go on to the ever-consistent Claude Giroux, another one like Jamie Benn that I would expect to stay in Ottawa if he were to potentially go into the open market, even if he were to test things out. I still think Ottawa has proven to be his home. I think he's enjoyed it there, and especially with the team and how they are playing this season, on their way potentially to the playoffs, I think for Giroux, that's exactly the type of position he wants to be in. You can see this year, just another solid season. I would say to start things out, it was looking a little bit towards retirement home direction, but he's starting to get a lot better over the last few. I think he has 6 points over his last 5, which is great to see. In Giroux's case, just being there as a leader is worth it enough for Ottawa, and the offense ain't too bad to back it up. I mean, 37 assists, 52 points, that's what he's on pace for. Not too bad, and at $6.5 million, I don't think that's all that bad value either. Though I definitely see a situation with, because of the age, him getting a little bit less, maybe around that $6 million range. And I think for Ottawa, with how good of an influence he's been there, it's a no-brainer to keep him. Now we go on to number 11 here, and this is a player that you might have had in the top 10 besides the recent controversies happening around him, but still is worth mentioning, and that is Aaron Ekblad of the Florida Panthers. Now, he said it wasn't malicious or anything, said he didn't know what was happening, but did get suspended by the NHL for 20 games for substance abuse. So we'll see if that's something that does affect his free agency, and I would say in ways he's been still largely fine for Florida. This year, I think it's been a little bit of a rough go, but in some cases, he's gotten better in terms of his offense after only putting up 18 points in 51 regular season games this year. He's on pace for 43 and 73, though that, of course, is not going to end up happening. I think in Ekblad's case, though, he's largely going to get that payday because of his body of work in the playoffs, how much he's able to elevate things when the going gets tough, and how many minutes he's able to play. We'll see if the Panthers are actually the team to keep him, though I think it would be pretty sad to see him go after just how much he's put into this Panthers franchise as a former first overall pick. Speaking of the Florida Panthers, let's get started inside the top 10 here with Sam Bennett, who I think is going to get a massive payday at this year's free agency. I mean, with how solid he was at the Four Nations, with how consistent of a performer he's been, especially in the playoffs too. You look at the last 2 playoffs and 14 points in 19 games last year, 15 points in 20 games the year before that. He's been a pretty critical piece of that Panthers playoff roster and has been a pretty critical piece all around. I mean, the energy he provides, the just pure hatred that he gets out of the opponents he plays for, that's something that's going to command a lot. There's been a lot of rumors about Montreal potentially bringing him on as a second line center option. I think for the now, it wouldn't be too bad. We'd see how it works out in the future, but I think the term is going to be high. The AAV is going to be a lot higher than some people expect. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Bennett commands like $6.5 million for 7 years. We're talking that amount of money for a player like that I think, especially when he gets his best hockey, when the going gets tough, that's going to be something a lot of GMs are going to be going after. Another Florida Panther in Brad Marchand, which is just so weird to say out loud, by the way. Can I just say that? In Marchand's case, though, even though I don't think he's going to get as big of a contract as Sam Bennett, mostly because of his age, he is still an incredibly important and productive player, and he will be that for the Florida Panthers. This year, he was on pace for 60 points in 78 games for the Bruins. Still great numbers there. And I think even though he is going to be going into this age group, he's going to sign probably a Pavelski type of deal, a 3-term deal where he's able to go onto the contender he wants. And even though the AAV is still at a pretty solid level, really it's about contending. It's about winning another Stanley Cup. In Marchand's case, I think that's going to be the big thing he desires. I think it's a reason why he even accepted a trade to Florida in the first place. So I think that'll be a major component of it. I think the Panthers would love to keep him, though I think realistically, he probably ends up going somewhere else after this. And I'll say it as well, to the people saying he's going to sign back with the Bruins, I don't think that's going to end up happening. I feel like this experience has probably been a little bit illuminating for Marchand, and I don't know if I personally would go back if I was him. Now, at number 8, another player that some people might be surprised to see so high, and I would say if it was like a couple of years ago, I don't even know if he would have been on the list, but we need to talk about Mikael Granlund, who I think has really been making a name for himself, both with San Jose and now for the Dallas Stars. And I'll be the first one to say, I did not like him, especially in his time with Pittsburgh. I thought he was absolutely brutal there, but after he got dealt in the Erik Karlsson trade, he almost completely turned his game around. With San Jose, he was a massive source of production, and by far their most consistent player in all 3 zones. And you can see after getting traded to Dallas, he's continued that type of production. 9 points, 8 assists in 13 games, has fit like a glove. And that shiftiness, the creativity, it's all been so much fun to watch. When Mikael Granlund has that confidence when he's actually given the opportunity to play in a major role, he can do quite well with it. And I think he's somebody that's going to command quite a bit at the free agency period because of that type of play. If he's able to replicate what he's done with Dallas and San Jose for another contender, you're easily getting a top 6 winger there and a really key, critical one. And I think for a lot of teams, the AAV might be a little bit less than some people are expecting because of the inconsistencies in the past. And Cap Wages right now has him on a projected contract at $4.6 million for just 2 years. And I gotta say, if you get Granlund for under $5 million, that is a steal and a half. Even if you get downgrades to even the Pittsburgh level, that's still, I think, an okay contract. But what he's doing now, I think, easily makes him worth at least $5-6 million, maybe even a bit more if he's able to really prove himself in the playoffs this year. But now we're getting into the high tier of free agents, the guys that I think will command quite a bit in terms of pay grade. And we go on to a player that I'm fascinated to see in terms of the actual contract that he ends up getting, and that is John Tavares of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, with Tavares and just how good he's been this year, that might honestly be a good thing, bad thing for Toronto. You look at what he's been able to accomplish, and in 57 games this season, he has 26 goals, 55 points, on pace for 34 goals, 72 points. He's been amazing for that Leafs forward group, and you can make the case, besides Mitch Marner, he's been their most consistent forward, and I think you'd have a pretty good case at it. Really, Tavares has shown his worth this season in a lot of key ways, and maybe getting stripped of the captaincy was good for his play in the end. And yes, the age, I think, will be a pretty big component of things, but with how Tavares plays the game, with him just being such a great thinker of it as well, I think he's somebody that is going to be aging a little bit more gracefully, and I think especially his performance this season shows exactly why that'll be the case. I think he could get pretty good money, obviously a downgrade over 11 million, but if he gets more in the 7, especially $8 million range if he goes to the open market on a lower term deal, I could easily see that. I think the problem with Tavares in Toronto has always been the fact that he's making maybe a couple million more than he should at all times, and that's really led to the disappointment. But if he's an $8 million player right now, that's an amazing contract, and I think that'll represent itself in the next deal he takes. Now, going just outside the top 5 here, we're going to go on to another center and a former teammate of John Tavares in Brock Nelson, who recently got shipped off from the Islanders to the Colorado Avalanche, and depending on how he does it with the Avs, especially in the playoffs this year, could be really boosting his value for this summer. Of course, 33 years old, and I think in Nelson's case, the consistent body of work that he's shown with the Islanders especially is, I think, what's going to give him the most value. When you look at the goal scoring and just how consistent in that position he's been, you look at the last 3 seasons before this year, back-to-back 30-plus goal seasons. This year's been a little bit of a downgrade, but he's still been good on the rush, still been good in offensive situations, and the Islanders have also not been the greatest team in the world either offensively, and Nelson's been having to carry the load for such a long time now. He hasn't been scorching or anything with the Avs, just 1 assist in 3 games so far, but I think he will be getting going eventually, and if he does, especially if he does have a solid playoffs, I could easily see him getting upwards of $7.5 million. At that center position with how valuable he is, I could see it. But now into the top 5, and we're going to start out with the biggest defenseman on the list. To me, by far the best, and the player that I think will get paid the best as well. Let's go on to Jakob Chychrun, who is a fascinating one. After getting shipped by Ottawa to Washington, he has had a career season in a lot of key ways. You look at the production, on pace for 23 goals, 54 points. He has been otherworldly for this Capitals team, jumping into the play so effortlessly, and just the confidence is just so much fun to watch. It's awesome. I do think most of the value for him will be coming on the offensive end with the booming shot he has, the resilience against defenders. He's just so much fun to watch out there play and to work with his teammates. And considering his age too, being just 26 years old, turning 27 later this March, he's somebody that I think, especially in this class, has that big advantage. A lot of the defensemen are on the wrong side. They're over 30 years old. In Chychrun's case, his youth, I think, is going to be to his benefit. Currently with cap wages, they project him at about $7.8 million for a max 7-year deal. If he goes to the open market, though, honestly, I see him getting $8 million, especially if there's a rebuilding team out there that could use some juice on their defense. I'm looking at a team like San Jose, for example. A player like Chychrun will be so much fun there. Now we move on to number 4 and go into a player that I think will have his value affected a little bit by this season, but not too much, and that is Brock Boeser of the Vancouver Canucks, who you can make the case is maybe the best pure goal scorer available in this free agency period. He's somebody that this year hasn't been able to show it all too consistently, just 20 on pace for 24 goals and 50 points this season. But I think he settles more so in last year's range, or maybe just a mix of both of them. I think he's a solid 60.30 goal scorer, and especially with somebody that can be more of a dynamic center alongside him, establishing the play and setting up the play for Boeser to finish. I think that is his perfect role ideally. We'll see how much he ends up getting, but I think $7 million in a longer term deal does make sense. I don't think Vancouver is going to be the team to actually give it to him, and I think he eventually ends up walking, which keeping him at the deadline just makes it even stranger. Now we go into number 3, and a player that I definitely don't think a lot of people would be expecting to see this high, but you absolutely should, dang it. And at number 3, I have Matt Duchene. I'm going to come out and say it. I think he might be one of the most underrated forwards in this league right now. What he's been able to do for Dallas and even Nashville, I think really goes under the radar. Sure, he was bought out, but a lot of that was because of Nashville not really being comfortable with that contract and the high AAV. But you look at what he's been able to do with Dallas, and in 80 games, 65 points last year. In 64 games, 66 points this year. He's on pace for 85 points this season, over 8 points per game, 32 goals. That's what he's going to be projecting at for the rest of this season. To me, the big thing, though, is the playoffs. Last year, besides that big goal in overtime against the Avs, he was largely invisible, just getting 6 points in 19 games. But if he's able to step that up, if he's able to play a major role here and really keep that playmaking at a consistent rate, to me, I think Duchene could get quite a lot. I would love to keep him in Dallas, but honestly, I think because of the rising cap there and Johnston also playing more of a role at center, I just don't think it's going to end up happening. I think Duchene could get a massive payday if he really wanted to. I mean, he loves it in Dallas. That's why he took $3 million to sign here last summer. So we'll see if that ends up happening again, but I think him taking a pay cut 3 times in a row would be a little bit too lucky, even for us. Now let's go into number 2, and a player that I'm really happy to see in this position thriving with the Winnipeg Jets this year. Let's go on to Nikolaj Ehlers, who I think is going to have a hopefully pretty great payday coming up this summer. Somebody was previously making $6 million for Winnipeg, and when he has been healthy, I mean, that's been worth every single penny. You can see this season in 57 games, he's a point per game, 21 goals, 36 assists, and 57 points. And last year, having a big healthy season, 61 points in 82 games there. Really, the last 2 seasons, pretty healthy body of work for him. And if that is able to continue out throughout the rest of this season, that is huge. The big thing as well, just like Duchene, is the playoff performances. Last year, just 2 assists in 5 games. I think he's somebody that really needs to step up because he's never really been this premier playoff performer. But I think if he has a big season, that would really change things up. But I love this skill. I love the creativity. The vision is just so much fun, and he is somebody that I just always love seeing thriving. And I think at free agency this year, a team can make a pretty big bet. I don't think he's going to get as much money as he probably should, at least if he stays healthy long term, but I could see him getting up to $7 million along that Brock Besser lane, hopefully on a longer term deal because he deserves it. But now we move on to number one and the best free agent in this crop, and especially with Mikko Rantanen being out of the race, it makes it a lot less interesting, this number one spot. But let's go on, shall we, to Mitch Marner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who is by far the best free agent here. I love myself some Duchesne, some Nikolaj Ehlers, some Jacob Chychruns, but Mitch Marner is really the highlight of this class in a lot of key ways. It seems like what's trending right now, especially if Marner is able to have a strong player performance, there could be offers upwards of $14 million, which would just be astronomical. I think there's a situation here where Marner can make like twice as much as the second highest paid free agent. We'll see what ends up happening there, but I think there is a situation for a team like Chicago to just go out there and give him as much money as humanly possible. And he's been the best Leafs forward this year with the most pace and creativity. He's been awesome to watch. He has its ups and downs, of course, especially come the playoffs. But you can't doubt the skill. You can't doubt the pace he provides. We'll see how much he's able to translate onto the playoffs this year. But if he has a strong playoffs, then I think the sky is the limit, and he especially is unlikely to stay with the Leafs because I think that contract could run them a lot higher than they're comfortable with. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be it for my free agency rankings today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed, just hit that like button, hit that subscribe and that notification bell. Lets me know that you guys enjoyed the videos and helps quite a bit on the channel. And let me know your thoughts as well down below on this whole free agency class. Which players do you want to see your team potentially sign? How much do you see some of these top players getting? Let me know all your contract predictions down below. Of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online to get the free agency predictions and class out there. And click on this card for all of my hockey predictions content right in one playlist. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. Have a fantastic hockey day and drink some water for me as well. Goodbye.